there's a chance that local companies actually get a bigger chance at the pie. Generative AI is going to hurt these big national global content producers, because I do think it's going to be answering a lot more of the questions that people are typing in. But I think when it comes to actually delivering a medical service or going to a coffee shop or what have you, I think that the Gen AI products might actually deliver more real world traffic than the current search paradigm.
Well, that's David Mihm. And if you're in digital marketing, you know he's one of the world's foremost experts on local SEO. What you may not know, though, is that David also has an expert perspective on Google's antitrust and regulatory issues and on the impact these issues have on the digital marketing landscape. David built and sold 2 companies, Get Listed and Tidings. And if you work in local SEO, there's a good chance some of the tools you use are based on his technology. He's a popular conference speaker and one of 3 partners at Near Media, an applied market research firm that helps multi-location enterprises maximize their local search investments. David's deep understanding of the search ecosystem and overall digital marketing trends give him a unique and exceptionally well-informed perspective. You won't want to miss this episode of The Digital Clinic. Tell me a little bit about the Digital Markets Act, its construct, its implications for search overall, and I'm interested in implications for Google in particular.
Yeah, totally. So it's the DMA came out in 2022. There were a series of sort of hearings or workshops. And then September 2023, I believe that the law sort of crystallized and said, okay, now these are what are called gatekeepers. So the law applies to, at the time, 6, now 7 very large multinational companies. It's all the big tech platforms: Google, Apple, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, ByteDance. And then a 7th one is actually the first European gatekeeper. Booking.com was designated a gatekeeper just last year. So this Digital Markets Act came into effect in 2023. Companies had until March of 2024 to sort of demonstrate their compliance with the law. It covers everything from app stores to iOS and Android platforms to browser choice to default search engine choices. Specifically as it relates to our business, search, the law only applies to companies with tens of billions of dollars in revenue, over 10,000 business users in Europe, and over 50 million European users, like consumer users. So it's like a very small set of companies. As it relates to search, so Google is like subject to this to the Digital Markets Act. And the provision that's most interesting to me is Article 6.5 or 6:5, which basically says they cannot preference their own services and products if a third party offers a similar service or product with respect to crawling, indexing, ranking.
Right.
And they have to present these results in a fair and non-discriminatory manner. And so that's very, very interesting to me as a local search practitioner, because Google business profiles containing basically all first-party data, right? Photography that's uploaded by Google users, business categories that they're soliciting directly from the business, reviews that they're soliciting from Google users. This is all first-party data. The primacy of the local pack in basically every local search result is very interesting, because there are plenty of businesses that are excluded from the local pack who offer very similar business profile services. Think of Yelp or Yellow Pages companies or TripAdvisor. Any large directory offers very much a competing product, and they are not eligible to appear in Google local results. And so Article 6.5, I think, is going to have serious teeth as it relates to local search once the European Commission kind of gets around to investigating that specific vertical. Currently, there are 3 active investigations: shopping, hotels, and flights, where Google clearly is showing its own products: Google Shopping, Google Flights, Google Hotels, very, very prominently, when there are plenty of other competing players in Europe. There's been a long-standing lawsuit. I think it was like a 7 or 8 year long lawsuit specific to shopping,
right,
that Google actually finally lost last year at the European Supreme Court. And they ended up having to pay a multi-billion-dollar fine. And that there's sort of the outcome of that case, I think, has maybe given regulators a little bit stronger leg to stand on in terms of the legal sort of foundation for applying penalties to Google for this exact kind of behavior, this self-dealing, self-preferencing behavior.
Right. The model that you use at Near Media, where your principal is a very interesting one. It's a combination of your consulting expertise along with your partners and primary research that you conduct. You've done a good bit of primary research around whether, in fact, Google is satisfying the stipulations in the Digital Markets Act.
Yeah, for sure.
And what's your conclusion?
Yeah. So to cut to the chase, our conclusion is that they're not complying with the Digital Markets Act provision,
Which is a shocker because
self-preferencing.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of studies out there that you can get just with any basic rank tracking software to identify one of the new elements. So Google introduced 3 new SERP elements, a new chip at the top of every search result page that has local intent, which is called places sites or comparison sites now, that users can click on, similar to news or shopping or images or maps. There's a new tab for places sites for local queries. We found almost no engagement with that tab. Something like, I don't even know, 20 out of 700 and some clicks in our most recent study across Germany, France, and Ireland. So that's the first introduction. The second is a carousel of URLs from places sites. These are directories like I said, Yelp, TripAdvisor, those kinds of sites.
Right.
A carousel of URLs from those sites. And then the third is an aggregator carousel where any one of those individual sites, so if Yelp.com is ranking 4th or 5th in a traditional search result, they can then have a carousel within the Yelp.com organic listing of individual businesses on Yelp.com, right? And so that requires a certain level of JSON LD markup, but for any competent company with a significant development team, that's not that difficult to implement. So we don't see a lot of that in the United States, and interestingly enough, but I wonder how much of that is due to lack of awareness of this specific markup, or if it's something that Google is actually just not showing. The reason I'm curious is because we found, A, those things don't show up very often, even in Europe, and B, very few users click on them. The thing that we focused on most in our user research is this places sites carousel, which includes multiple aggregators in a prominent place on the search results. So this is where, getting back to the rank tracking question. So any rank tracking software is going to tell you like, oh, this element exists in the first position, and the local pack exists in the second position. Sometimes they're flipped, but generally speaking, Google, I think, could argue that they are presenting this places sites module prominently. It is usually that in our data, we've found that it's not quite as prominent as Google business profiles are, but like basically 50-50 in terms of which one occupies the top spot. The issue is, of course, that the map interface that accompanies Google business profile is so compelling. There are these 5 gold stars alongside every business, and you have little review snippets, and you have photos of these businesses. None of those things are necessarily true of those places sites modules, and so nobody is clicking on them, right? And so this, to me, gets at the fair and transparent and non-discriminatory parts of the provision 6.5, given that that Google is not presenting results from these competitors in the same way that they're presenting results from their own product and service. And so I think that is a clear example of self-preferencing. Google is one of the smartest companies in the world. They've probably done their own user research.
Sure.
And they're saying, oh, well, let's put this out there because it's going to look like we're compliant. But the reality is we know we're still going to capture the same clicks that we were always getting for Google business profiles. And so that's basically exactly what we found, that typically if a user is on a SERP where both the places sites carousel and Google business profiles are present, they will click the Google business profiles interface about 40 to 45% of the time. They'll click a places sites result less than 2% of the time. So it's like 20x the engagement that Google is keeping for itself on Google business profiles, even if it appears directly below this places sites carousel. And the one exception we found to that behavior actually is in hotels. And the reason is because there are so many ads in hotels, many of which have their own very compelling interface that includes a photo and reviews and pricing information, that users don't scroll far enough down the page to see either the places sites carousel or the Google business profiles hotel finder. And so the only way that Google's sort of dominance of the local SERP with its own Google business profiles product, the only place we don't see that is when Google's collecting all the ad revenue from these hotel carousel ads. So
tell me a little bit about how you go about conducting the user research that you do.
Yeah, totally. So we sort of crowdsource a panel of real human beings. These are not bots. This is not done through ChatGPT. We source a panel of real human beings who meet our clients' sort of demographic desires, right? So we recruit them to essentially a user testing platform. And we present them with a prompt. We say, for example, you've become dissatisfied with your primary care provider and you're looking for a new one. You go to Google to help you find a new provider, right? And so we'll drop them on the google.com homepage at both mobile and desktop. And we, as part of we pay them for their time, and it's very clear, like they're sharing their screen and their audio.
Right.
And so we're watching them do their searches and narrate their experience and sort of hearing what they're reacting to. And then we're aggregating, we're annotating their entire video and aggregating all of the clicks they make and the attributes of the results that they're clicking on, right? So what was the star rating? What position was it in? What was the photo? Was there a tagline showing up? Was there a review snippet? All of those things that relate to Google business profiles and organic search, kind of the same thing. For example, product review schema on a legal website query, which aren't supposed to show up in an organic result. And by golly, those things still work really well. So that kind of stuff. And then I think even more, so we aggregate all that data and we sort of present it back to our clients and we say, here's essentially a unique click-through rate curve for your specific vertical that you're interested in across both Google business profiles and organic search and paid as well. And so one of the really interesting findings that, we've done for clients or come across for clients is when LSAs are present, just how dramatic local service ads, how dramatically they impact sort of click-through rate and choice of provider or choice of business. Google must be making a fortune on those, to be perfectly honest. It's been really interesting. So we aggregate all of the sort of quantitative data together, give clients a view of what that looks like. And then we also, some of the most interesting findings that we've come up with have been around messaging. And so what messaging resonates most with clients? Is there a particular type of photo, for example, that they really want to see? One of the examples we found in OB-GYN was, one of the sites that people clicked on had a medical stirrups on the service page for a checkup, right? And women absolutely were like, "Oh my God, this is horrible. How can you possibly have it on this page? Have that on this page?" So things like that are just like, very like, depending on this sort of acuity of how people react, but some things are like really actionable for messaging and photography and taglines and use of reviews and all these kinds of things, depending on the vertical. And I think that's the really interesting thing that we found is, there's a certain set of things that is pretty consistent from medical to legal to restaurants to hotels to home services. There's really different behavior depending on the vertical, just for one example, right? So lots and lots of clicks on the map that shows up above Google business profiles for home services. So this was a kitchen remodeling prompt. You're remodeling your kitchen. You need help from a professional. You do a search on Google. People really wanted, at least in the EU, they really wanted to go to a showroom and see what the kitchens looked like. Huge percentage of people clicked on the map. And so ranking in that context becomes totally irrelevant, right? It's all about, are you somewhere in the person's local area? And if you are, what's the first impression that your business profile is putting out there? So what are your stars? Essentially, that people are using stars sort of heuristically as a disqualifier. What are the sort of one or two photos that show up first on your Google business profile? A lot of the businesses anyway clearly had not claimed their profile. These were user photos. They were poorly lit. They were grainy, that sort of thing. And so people would disqualify businesses from the map. Which in a category where I would have felt like, this guy's coming to my house, or this company's coming to my house. I don't necessarily care where they're located. I do want to see their before and after projects. That would have been my sort of default mindset going in. But no, it turns out ranking less important, presentation more important. So that's just one example of the sort of really interesting sort of behavioral findings that we've come up with in just one category and in just one market. So
and I would imagine as well, I mean, our experience with user testing in a different context, but sort of similar approach is that hearing the voice of a customer saying repeatedly, this was horrible, or I got stuck here, or I like this much better, is so much more compelling than aggregated data.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we certainly have played clips for our panel for clients. In this case, though, I think and I don't know how you guys have done user testing historically, but I do think that there's value to, we use panels of several hundred folks.
Sure.
Which I don't think traditional user testing typically, like you wouldn't probably have 300 people looking at, and usually looking at your own website, right? Yeah. And so we're essentially showing folks, here's why you might be missing a click. Google Analytics is showing you what clicks you got, and Google Search Console might be showing you some of the keywords that people were using when they found you. But like, what about the clicks you're missing? Why aren't you getting the click, even if you're in the first position? There is some sort of quantitative value, I think, to having a large enough panel to deliver that with some statistical probability in terms of why you might be losing a click.
I absolutely agree. I didn't mean to discount the value of the quantitative result. More that our experience is that the quantitative data, particularly for people at a C level who don't necessarily understand the intricacies of search or user experience, it's much easier for them to breeze by a stat or a number than it is the sound of a customer who is frustrated. And in particular, we have at times created highlight reels of, here are 16 customers encountering exactly the same problem. And that's incontrovertible in a way that the data was not, for some reason.
Not everyone is sort of as data-driven as you and I are, probably.
So, exactly. But that's fascinating. I can see why that would be really valuable.
It's been super fun to work. I mean, this is very time-intensive. We have sort of dabbled with finding, AI video reviewers essentially but the intricacies of collecting all of the data points that we need to collect, and the value of us actually hearing customers narrate these experiences, like it just takes a lot of time to do this. And I think the output has been really, really valuable for our client.
You mentioned a couple of things. One is directories and aggregators. Historically, there were aggregators, horizontal platforms that were very important in terms of local search.
For sure.
And that through your research, you have found that is generally not the case any longer, that this is very much a verticalized space. There are directories that matter for a particular vertical. They may or may not have weight outside of that vertical.
That's right.
But that's the way to think about and focus on optimization for a locality or a vertical.
So when I first got started in local search, this notion of a citation, which has a new meaning in the world of AI, but at the time, essentially a mention of a business in structured format where Google could identify, this is the business name, this is the address, this is the phone number. Maybe there's a mention of the website, but not necessary. The more of those structured mentions that you had across the web, the higher you ranked in the original Google Business Profile results, Google Places results. This was before the Venice algorithm update of 2012, and where Google sort of artificially inflated the rankings of local businesses ahead of very strong national websites. The organic part of the local search results was all of these directories. It was Yelp, City Search, Super Pages, Yellow Pages. I mean, that you could basically say that the same 10 to 12 domains ranked for basically every local keyword across the entire United States. And that is no longer the case. Again, the Venice update, so we're now seeing plenty of localized organic results for the last 12 years now, flowing into local search. And also, I think we've seen the growth of vertical platforms. So Yelp is essentially now the only horizontal directory left standing with any kind of significant presence in organic search. There are certainly very strong vertical players like Houzz and home remodeling and TripAdvisor and travel and that sort of thing. And we do see users engaging with directories on a regular basis, but they're all these vertical directories. Yelp has had very low engagement in all of our user research, but people in the healthcare vertical, they'll go to ZocDoc, they'll go to HealthGrades, they'll go to MetaFind. The horizontal directories have really sort of faded away in terms of their organic search rankings, and consequently, the benefit of being mentioned on one of these sites are no longer as prominent as they used to be. So the value of getting mentioned on them has also gone down. Meanwhile, the value of getting mentioned prominently on a strong vertical directory has, I would say, gone up. If you are one of the top ranked businesses on HealthGrades and MetaFind and Vitals and all these other sites, your Google Business Profile for that doctor probably also has a pretty significant boost. So the same concept applies, but the sites that Google values from a organic ranking standpoint have definitely changed dramatically in the last 12 to 15 years.
You made another good point related to that research as well, which is a lot of healthcare systems have a find a doctor function that is so poor that they're just handing business to the aggregators.
They really are.
And I think you made a very shrewd point, which is, look, you should be looking at ZocDoc or one of these platforms that has tuned and tested their Find a Doc functionality, and yours should mimic that because you already know that works.
Exactly. Yeah. And ZocDoc specifically, I don't know anyone at ZocDoc. I've never worked for ZocDoc. So this is not necessarily an endorsement, but just based on our user research,
Sure.
People loved using that website to find a provider.
Right.
They loved the sort of very fast, faceted search at the top of every sort of search result that they landed on. They loved the reviews. Generally, ZocDoc has, I would say, better photography of providers than most other medical sites. In particular, they do a good job of highlighting the insurance plans that each doctor takes. Now, how accurate that is,
Sure.
I can't vouch for, but certainly consumers are engaging with that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot to be learned from ZocDoc's user experience for sure. If you are building or revamping your own Find a Doctor interface, I think the biggest sort of error that I see health systems making with Find a Doctor is either that it's only a search interface, so there's not a corresponding sort of clickable directory to providers by specialty and location, which is essential for SEO.
Yeah.
You can't just say, oh, we've got a search feature and we've got an XML sitemap. We're done. Our SEO is good. That's not how it works. And then the second thing is hosting your Find a Doctor solution on a subdomain, right? So a subdomain is still treated as a quasi-independent website. And so you're not any of the value of any of the equity, the site authority that your main domain is built up doesn't necessarily transfer to doctor profiles hosted on doctors.healthcare.org. So.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you in real life, we've rebuilt Find a Doc functionality for some large health systems, taking very strong cues from ZocDoc.
Yeah.
And it works very well.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. Like I said, the consumer engagement with that site was noticeably stronger than any other aggregator and any individual Find a Doc system.
So sticking with the regulatory environment, let's shift to the world of Google in the United States. There have been a few very interesting things that have happened. One is the antitrust finding that Google is monopolistic. And the second sort of corollary is the testimony that was given to the Department of Justice, combined with a leak of some Google documentation. So let's kind of start there with the Google documentation and DOJ testimony. What did we learn out of that corpus of information that was a surprise and or a point of validation around something that Google had, and I'll use the word lied about for a long time?
I think that's an appropriate term. Particularly given the testimony. So yes, the thing that was validating to pretty much every longtime SEO is that Google absolutely uses click-through data from Google search results as a meaningful lever for organic rankings. And that's been a core part of their algorithm for a very, very long time. That was very clear in both the API leak as well as the DOJ testimony and discovery documentation. I think that the thing that surprised, I don't think that the behavior surprised me, but the degree to which Chrome browser data is leveraged for search rankings seemed to be a surprise based on the number of references in the API documentation. So we don't know, there's no weight variables assigned within the API leak, but certainly the number of references to Chrome user data was interesting, and that also came out in the DOJ testimony as well. So I would say those were the two. If you were a Google Kool-Aid drinker, you may have been totally shocked by the first release in terms of the click-through rate, meaning making meaningful change in rankings. But I think that those of us who long looked at Google with a little skeptical eye were not surprised, but definitely validated. So
the implications then of the remedy for the antitrust finding are also pretty profound. And one of the things that's being explored is divestiture of Chrome, which we now understand to be kind of the core signal for Google.
At the very least, I would think Google should be forced to license its Chrome data to competitors like DuckDuckGo or Ecosia or even Bing. I think that is clearly such a strong competitive advantage and monopolistic advantage for Google that that would be to do anything short of that, to ignore the value of Chrome, I think would be a mistake. Absolutely, divestiture of Chrome, I think, is on the table. There's certainly some very interesting ramifications if Google is forced to divest Google Maps. I don't think that that's part of the DOJ case necessarily, but in terms of antitrust remedies, generally mapping platforms are very, very expensive to maintain, and they have been very expensive to build. And so there is a question whether a standalone Maps application would even be financially viable. So I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a business analyst at that scale. I can't speak to whether that's viable or not. But I do think that's one thing. I think that Chrome, it strikes me like, given that Mozilla has survived for so long as a very strong browser alternative, as essentially a nonprofit. I don't think there's the same sort of financial considerations with divesting Chrome as something like Google Maps would be.
Considering both of these environments, Europe and the DMA, and the US and this antitrust finding, I guess two questions. What do you think will happen with Google, and what should happen with Google?
I think very little will happen here in the United States. It's somewhat helpful that the decision is in the judicial system at the moment in terms of what to do about remedies, as opposed to legislative, where I think absolutely nothing is going to happen for the next 4 years at least. And I don't think on the regulatory side of things, I think I'd be very surprised if the new FTC chair pursues antitrust policies with the same gusto and vigor that Lena Khan did in the previous administration. So I kind of don't see much happening here at the sort of federal level, aside from the current case that's already in, I think, Judge Mehta's lap in terms of deciding what to do. So in Europe, I'm less clear about what's going to happen. I think Reuters broke the story that the EU is like strongly considering implementing damages in this initial in this initial DMA self-preferencing investigation. So that story came out on a Friday, and on a Saturday morning, the White House put out a statement about, you better not regulate our tech companies, Europe. We're going to put tariffs on you. And Jim Jordan put out a response, who I guess is now in the Commerce Department or something, saying something like, you need to explain yourselves why you're regulating American tech companies. So I can't say what's going to happen in Europe. If the investigation had happened a year ago, I think I'd be more sure that there would be fines and penalties imposed on Google. Less clear that that's going to happen, just given the changed political environment. What should happen? I absolutely think Google's a monopoly. I think that they should be essentially. We've put out a policy statement at Near Media about the DMA, and we think that Google should be subject to publicly verifiable clickstream sharing, essentially, not for any given query. I don't think it would impact our jobs as SEOs, but just, hey, this is how many queries we're getting for these, like a Google Trends dashboard, essentially, and here's how many we're sending to Google Business Profiles and to individual hotel suppliers and to aggregators from various interfaces or modules on the SERP. We think that kind of public transparency, I think, would be a good starting point to help people understand just how people are engaging with Google search results, and to verify that if they are complying with this law, either that trend is going downwards at a minimum or has disappeared entirely. So I think that would be the starting point for what should happen with regulating Google is a publicly verifiable data set about what modules people are clicking on.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me as well. Let's talk about AI and the implications of AI in search. What in your research or in your practice are you seeing as the implications, the incursion of AI into the search domain?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, I'm monitoring, as you guys are as well. You guys have a great analytics team. We work together on one client. We're certainly not seeing a significant dent in Google's market share currently. I think, all of the generative AI products combined are still under 1% for most of my clients anyway. Google's still 85 to 90%, if not higher, for all organic search traffic. And those numbers are staying. I'm surprised at how steady they have stayed for organic search, even with the onslaught of AI overviews, particularly in the healthcare space. The organic search performance hasn't dipped as much as I might have predicted, seeing those things show up. Having said that, one of the key sort of pieces of advice I've been giving my clients is just that we can't necessarily equate click-throughs from ChatGPT or Perplexity or anything else as a substitute for how many people are using those products, because you're getting just full funnel experiences in a single ChatGPT session or a single Gemini session for the percentage of users that are using something else, where you can ask ChatGPT a very high funnel question. Tell me about knee replacement surgery, right? And it will, a very broad query, but one that has a lot of search volume, at least by traditional keyword measurement tools. ChatGPT will give you the full, here's, everything involved in a knee surgery. Here's the recovery time, typical recovery time. Here are the side effects. Here's what you need to ask your doctor, all those kinds of things. That's all content that would have been probably 5, 6, 7, 8 search queries. Historically, that's now all in a single session in ChatGPT with no clicks out typically to a website. The thing that I think is actually hopeful about AI in search as it relates to businesses with brick and mortar service delivery models or local service delivery models is that I've noticed ChatGPT will prompt me with an explicit follow-up at the end of almost every initial sort of higher funnel chat. Hey, do you want recommendations for providers or companies or whatever who do X in your area? They will almost invariably ask that at the bottom of one of these higher funnel. And those are like knee replacement surgery. Any mom and pop orthopedic practice is going to have a very hard time ranking for that term against Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins and the Cleveland Clinic and Penn Medicine. I mean, it's a very strong set of national competitors. So, and that's not a term that Google would typically localize, where you'd see a Google Business Profiles result. And so I think there's a chance that local companies actually get a bigger chance at the pie. Generative AI is going to hurt these big national global content producers, because I do think it's going to be answering a lot more of the questions that people are typing in. But I think when it comes to actually delivering a medical service or going to a coffee shop or what have you, I think that the Gen AI products might actually deliver more real world traffic than the current search paradigm does.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. What's curious to me is the difference, as you suggested, when we look at data, we don't see much incursion into conventional search. But when you look at attitudinal research or consumer preference research, there's a very strong preference for using AI over conventional search. And so I wonder, like you, if the nature of the queries are still there. The nature of the query has changed. And it's now a query that's much further down the funnel than it was before.
I think that might be true. Users may be using Gen AI to do their initial research, and then they still would probably be conducting follow-up brand queries, for example, in Google or Bing or whatever their search engine is. And they'd probably still be interacting with a website based on that brand query or a Google Business Profile based on that brand query. So yeah, to your point, I think that maybe we're going to just see a shift in search behavior. But I don't, again, for a typical sort of, regionally focused medical organization or a typical local service business, I'm not sure that I see ChatGPT or AI overviews as the same existential threat that a site like, what was it, Chegg just sued Google for stealing traffic or something. So I'm not sure I would see it as the same existential threat for my business.
What adjustments, if any, are you making to search strategy, local strategy, to ensure that you're hedging your bets in both directions?
For sure. So I think that I'm not sure this is necessarily an adjustment, but a sort of shifting of weight maybe in strategy, and really trying to help clients understand, look, you have got to be explicit about this service is available at this location, and these providers practice at this location and offer this service, and sort of having a very strong structured data set behind the scenes that is powering not just your Find a Doctor tool, but the content page on your orthopedics silo that's talking about knee replacement surgery. You need to be very explicit about, these are the places where you can get your knee replaced, and these are the providers that are delivering that service. And then that will help you show up, hopefully, at the bottom of the sort of ChatGPT response, where they're prompting users, do you want help with this problem locally? That kind of activity, I think, has been important for organic search, and I think to some extent for GBP results for quite a while. But I do think that level of data fidelity has been a struggle for healthcare organizations, I think, to get their hands around, at least with the ones that I work with. I think it's now becoming like even more important than it was before. And I think one interesting thing that I think maybe will change moving forward, it hasn't yet, again, given because Google is still the 800-pound gorilla. Site architecture has always been something I've been super focused on, and making sure that your internal link graph is aligning to show your most popular pages, the pages where you want to sell stuff, as actually having the most internal links. Large language models may be less dependent on links as a sort of dominant ranking signal. And it might just be more about making sure that you're mentioning things like you are the, #1 US news hospital in Seattle or whatever. Right. So it may be less about sort of link graphs and more about mention graphs, and kind of being very, very consistent with your messaging about what makes you special, why patients should choose you, that sort of stuff. So,
yeah. And then this gets into the notion of building a brand, and building a brand with the right descriptors in as many places as possible, not on your site.
That's right. Exactly. And understanding what those sites are. I mean, to some extent, if a language model is trained on data that's 2 years old, you might not have that much of a chance to influence it. But increasingly, like paying attention to the sources, the media sources that are cited by ChatGPT and AI overviews, and adjusting your PR strategy to target the sources that these the sort of, the RAG models are sort of pulling in to the initial LLM sort of results. So
I think that's right. Yeah. And then I think, coming back to one of the things you mentioned early on, which is the use of schema. Make all the machines' jobs easier, as easy as possible.
Exactly right. Even if your content management system doesn't fully support all of the various schema elements that we as SEOs would like it to, even looking at schema to understand how the topics and the concepts in your space can be structured, I think would be a really useful, interesting starting point for your content teams and your website product teams to understand how all these the topics and content should be fitting together. Is there a specific protocol treatment for a given medical condition, for example, that schema has already identified as a series of things it expects to see structured data on, or is available to be structured in schema? I think is a really interesting way to approach your content.
There's obviously a significant diversity of opinion on the actions that people should and shouldn't take in the face of the rise of AI. On one end of the continuum, there's a faction that would say, seed the SEO game, build your brand as much as possible. You're not going to rank for informational queries that will be subsumed by AI or other aggregators, that sort of thing. And then others say, particularly in verticalized niches, it's still worth doing that. You just have to be very, very careful about your focus and the structure of the content. Where do you fall on that?
I'm definitely in the second camp. I've never worked with a large enough, Meredith brand publisher or something like that, where, they could instantly rank for a sort of high level keyword, popular keyword with their content. So I've never worked with a site that could just do that. I've always advised clients on targeting the terms that are actually achievable to rank for, Is Google showing some evidence of localizing terms in this related to this topic, or is the national competition just sort of missing this on when they talk about a particular condition or whatever, and kind of trying to identify those gaps. So I don't think the strategy's necessarily changed, but I also don't think that seeding the SEO game is like necessarily a good strategy. I think you should still be trying to be one of the sites that is pulled in as authoritative for the AI overview, for example, or making sure that you are mentioned as a source in ChatGPT as a domain expert in this particular topic. So I don't know, even if that doesn't lead to a click, I think, again, to your point about brand, like you still want your brand to be out there as being an expert in this particular thing. So I think you should still be very much paying attention to search visibility. In fact, I would say maybe visibility is even more important than it has ever been, but I don't know that traffic is really the right way to measure that anymore. And that's something that I don't have a good answer right now. Like, what is the right way to measure visibility? I think AI overviews may be a little more straightforward, but from my own just like anecdotal research, you get a very different set of results in ChatGPT if you're logged into the product for a lot of very, like basically every query. If I do a search from Portland and you do the same search here in Seattle, logged into ChatGPT, you get a very different set of results, and it's not the same set of results that the API returns. So all of these studies that we're seeing now about here's our brand visibility metric based on the ChatGPT API, that has no bearing in what actual people are seeing if they're logged into ChatGPT, which I think is going to be a real challenge for measuring visibility.
It's the same quantity that's existed in local
forever. Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think there's always been more sort of variability in Google Business Profile results than organic results since as long as I can remember. So you're right. It's just sort of turning that dial up on, okay, we need to be sort of taking a broader cross section of of terms, and also looking at a broader cross section of locations when we're doing these searches to understand how we're appearing.
Yeah. We have been actively exploring monitoring applications
Yep.
and haven't found anything that
No.
I'm willing to pull the trigger on.
No, absolutely. I think it's still, so I think at this point it's good to be aware that this is a problem, but I don't think that the solution has really come about yet. I think honestly, I think it's going to have to be something to do with sort of just like crowdsourced rankings through Mechanical Turk or something like that. And even then, I think it's going to be very difficult to say, oh, well, is that a representative set of people, right? What have they put into their ChatGPT sort of query stream historically? What does the application know about them? And does that match your own audience, right? So that may, I'm not sure what the solution is, but what I can say is, at least as it relates to localized queries, I don't think that just taking the API's word for it is a real solution. I don't think that that's a productive metric to follow.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very interesting time to be in search and focused on the search industry. As you suggested, we were chatting previously, this is the first instance in years and years that Google's had meaningful competition. And they now have a lot of competition that they've had to react to. I think I heard you on a prior interview I was listening to make a pretty controversial suggestion that maybe Google should consider putting search on autopilot and focusing very heavily on Gemini.
Well, I think that this is like they're at the innovator's dilemma, like crisis point right now. I think that they are, 2 years ago that they were correct to perceive ChatGPT as an existential threat.
Right.
And I think a lot of what we saw very early on with the search generative experience was very much performative for Wall Street. All of the early days of hallucination and everything else, like that was Google in a full on panic.
Right.
I do think that their R&D efforts in generative AI have paid off. I mean, I think that Gemini, is a viable product at this point. It's probably something north of minimum viable products. The other thing is, obviously, we've seen a lot of at least tech press sort of decrying the degrading of Google search results over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And I think part of the problem sort of for Google, the company, is that it seems like they are sort of federated to such a way into all these little individual product fiefdoms where the shopping team needs this for shopping search results, and the local team needs this for local search results, and the medical team needs this for medical search results. The way they think is like boxes in a search result. And for ChatGPT to come along and to totally say, no, we don't have any boxes, we just have answers, right? I think that was like such a shift in search paradigm and user experience. And I'm not sure that Google is sort of like in its current mode is fully equipped to deal with like a radically different proposition like that, just because of the way the company has been structured for the last 20 years. And so I think it's really a time of the innovator's dilemma. Like, okay, are we going to bet that this thing is the next thing? Much in the same way that Facebook, I think, was like, no, we can see Facebook's kind of dying, which I think you could make an argument that Google search is kind of in the Facebook of 2015 kind of phase right now. I've logged on to Facebook in 4 or 5 years probably. So, I mean, I think that that's kind of become secondary to Meta's success, and that Instagram and WhatsApp are really where they've placed their bets. And I think Sundar Pichai's in the sort of quarterly earnings calls has said like, we're aiming to get 500 million Gemini users. Like that is our, that is where we see the future. I would at least be experimenting with like, and we've seen some rumblings about Gemini mode or AI mode, where it's like, you just get a Gemini experience for a certain query, right? And right now, I think that Google's thinking about that as like, oh, if I click this button, then I can see it. I can pop open a comparative window. I'm talking about like, by default, like show, if you think that a certain query is better solved by a pure Gemini result, do that. I think you have to like start displacing your own sort of historical golden goose a little bit if you want to maintain users and stop them bleeding away and trying ChatGPT and frankly, younger users have been using TikTok for 4, 5, 6 years. Prabhakar Raghavan said as early as I think 2020 that the majority of Gen Z folks started their searches on TikTok instead of Google. And so I think this time is like very, there's so many different options now. The one thing Google has going for it is habit, right? Still, people are still typing in google.com and doing a search. or they've got it installed as their default search engine on their Chrome browser, which may go away as well. The competition truly is one click away at this point in a way that it's never been before.
Yeah.
And I think if Google wants to retain its existing installed base, like I think it may have to be a little bit more aggressive about displacing its golden goose.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly my perception that there's a significant tax to using Google.
Yeah.
Because they've been a monopoly,
Yep.
and they've been able to impose that tax at will. And I'm unwilling increasingly to suffer that tax.
Yeah, totally.
And my own habits have changed markedly.
Yep.
I usually start with perplexity.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'll go to Google for something specific, for some sort of recovery search or to find a particular business, but it's often based upon information that I've gleaned from perplexity.
Mm-hmm. I do the same thing with ChatGPT. I'm less aggressive about Gen AI being my default. I still find myself using Google quite a bit, but I use ChatGPT for complex queries that my brain sort of knows Google is going to do a poor job of answering. Right. If it's a long tail query about some Looker Studio formula I'm trying to do, or frankly, even for an upcoming, I'm speaking at SMX Munich coming up next month and trying to figure out like, okay, good restaurants to go out with colleagues in Munich. Historically, that is a search I totally would have started on Google, but I know that the experience has been very frustrating because of all of the boxes that Google puts on the page, essentially.
Yeah.
I prefer the cleaner sort of starting point experience that Gen AI offers. And that's what I'm saying. I think even to hold me as a user, I think Google needs to be more, I would be less averse to sort of switching over, less eager to switch over if Google would just present me with a radically different experience.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I'm more willing to try new things today than I've been in 15 years, probably.
Yeah.
My own search habits.
Yeah, I am as well.
Yeah.
To try new things and then to try that same new thing 15 times over the next 15 weeks because the rate of change is so fast.
Yeah, and people rightly still complain about ChatGPT's data quality in local search, right? That is another massive competitive advantage that Google has. Is Google Business Profiles are generally the most accurate, complete set of data about any given local business, most current, most photography, et cetera. And ChatGPT, even if they just suck in the Bing index, like that's not as good, right? And so people have rightly said like, oh, the data is not as good for local searches when I do these queries on ChatGPT. And I'm just like, that they will find a way to solve that. They have how many billions of dollars in venture funding that Yelp would love one of those billions of dollars to be their like exclusive local data supplier. They can do a similar deal with TripAdvisor and House and everything else. Like if and when local search becomes a real vertical for ChatGPT, I think that problem is solved with a few $1 billion, right? And so I see the experience as being much more important right now. And yes, I'm still fact checking every business that pulls up in Google, but there will be a time where that won't be necessary. So I think pay more attention to the experience and to the again to like the kinds of as we were talking about in schema, like the kinds of sort of facets that ChatGPT highlights for these searches and the kinds of prompts that it follows up with asking users. I would be paying very close attention to what that looks like right now, even if the data quality isn't there, because I do think over time we'll see whether it's ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or who knows who's going to win the game right now. But I do think we'll start to see over time our sort of bleeding away of Google users. So,
I think my experience is if I'm looking for a synthesis or distillation of information, then I'll start with some form of AI. If I'm looking for interaction and challenge and exploration, I'll start with AI. If I need a particular fact or data or address, then I'll go to Google. But that's sort of it.
It depends. I think particular factor data. So I'm a sort of NBA salary cap nerd. And so I asked ChatGPT a bunch of questions about how much money does this player make and like how long is this player's contract and whatever. And I would say, so it didn't do a good job last year before the introduction of Search GPT. But in this most recent trade deadline in February, it did a really good job. The introduction of sort of this real-time pull from Search GPT, I think, has really helped with ChatGPT's fact accuracy. So I actually, depending on the discipline, the domain, I still would probably go to ChatGPT if I just needed a sort of a Siri-like fact that I might have looked up through voice search.
I'd have to take my own advice and go back and try
it on Perplexity. Maybe Perplexity just needs a better set of sort of data points.
Maybe. Let's talk about the implications of AI for digital marketing. How do you use AI in your own practice?
Yep.
And what do you foresee as the future of what does a digital marketer do in 2 years, 5 years?
ChatGPT is empowering all of us to be more productive at tasks that we might have historically spent hours in a Google Sheet or Excel or whatever. Like, we can now sort of get that analysis done in seconds or minutes as opposed to hours or weeks, right? And so there's sort of a productivity factor that I'm excited about as essentially a solo consultant. Gen AI is going to allow me to be more productive and to sort of mimic agency level services, because I can just do more faster.
Right.
So I think that that's kind of exciting. We're going to need to obviously keep up to date with what's happening in all these Gen AI products, but just from a professional skill standpoint, I think we're gonna need to understand like where and what we can delegate and what Gen AI is good when we do delegate it, where it's particularly skilled,
Right.
and where we still are going to be actually hold value with a particularly strong opinion or a particularly well curated set of training data or whatever that is. And so I think like sort of being able to make those calculations on the fly, I think will be an important skill. I have not built that skill up myself at all, but I can kind of see based on my very early fumblings with Gen AI in the last sort of 6 to 9 months, I think that kind of thing will be important. I feel like I have leveled up my Looker Studio game 4 levels in the last 6 weeks based having ChatGPT as my tutor. Just saying, look, here's how I would do this in Google Sheets, right? Tell me what the formula is that I need to add as like a calculated field in Looker Studio. And it actually works. I mean, like, I feel like I have learned 6 months worth of Looker Studio, watching videos from experts in Looker Studio and BigQuery and all of this. I feel like I've learned that much in the last like 2 or 3 weeks with ChatGPT as my tutor. Yeah. And so I think that's like that kind of like technical specificity is really compelling. I think I don't know Python. Happy to admit that freely. But like now I'm thinking about maybe I should just learn like intro to Python. Like what are the sort of concepts of how this language sort of works? Yeah. And then having ChatGPT do all of the syntax when I actually need to make a query or something like that. So sure. I think that there's that level, like that's kind of where I see ChatGPT being particularly useful in my day-to-day work today. Where I encourage clients to use it is to have your content teams and your product teams putting ChatGPT in the persona of your customer. So if you say like you are a caregiver of a patient with a 104 fever and a history of ear infections, like if they're looking for care, like what are the questions they're going to be asking? What are they going to be looking for on a website? And it does a really good job, I think, of like highlighting really big content themes that a page that is trying to address that particular person should be talking about. And so I don't do that myself because I'm not the one writing the content or like putting the content briefs together. But that is definitely, I think, a real strong utility for Gen AI is not writing the content whole cloth, which I still think humans do a slightly better job of, at least expert humans do a slightly better job of, but just like the outline of content and understanding the themes and the messages that need to be highlighted. It does a good job of developing personas and filling in the gaps in personas when you've got an initial framework. What am I missing? Exactly. And as you suggested, a good job of content themes. And, as you allude to, in healthcare and medtech, the need for expertise and the implications of having content that is not fully accurate are profound. But it also, this is an industry where true expertise actually is overweighted, even algorithmically. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's as we were talking about earlier, like it's the same cabal of like 4 sites that dominate every prominent query in healthcare. And they have parlayed their brand even if into strong rankings for everything, even if that individual piece of content isn't particularly strong. So I don't know if that's you're getting at by sort of like, expertise being overplayed or whatever, but it certainly feels that way to me. So, well, I was actually alluding to something different, which is, we've had experience, particularly with large health systems, large sites in the healthcare space, of shifting content strategy from a sort of a generic content strategy. We have a content team and they produce content and it's generally on target to actually your content should be written by someone who is a medical doctor. And we should make quite a lot of that credential by implementing schema and creating an ecosystem that very much drives home the expertise and the qualification of this author. And that can yield profound performance improvement. For sure. Well, and it is supposed to have yielded profound performance improvement since the EEAT release, whatever, 4 years ago, whenever that was. I guess I'm less bullish on that being the reason that a particular piece of content ranks than I am. I still think it boils down to brand and sort of domain authority in the like domain being like the topical authority, and brand as being like by far the two sort of dominant signals that Google's using. My colleague that I trust, Multi-Landwehr, of Idealo in Germany, who's been involved in some of these DMA lawsuits. Actually, his company is suing Google in Germany. But he's put out a couple of like really awesome LinkedIn posts about sort of how to better optimize content for LLMs. And two of his takeaways are, yes, having more like true experts taking a stand and having those stands be quoted in, sort of a prominent part of the page, and also being very explicit about statistics and facts with numbers. Those two things will make it more likely that your content gets pulled into an LLM. So the example I love that he gave was, don't just say that Berlin is a large city in Germany, say it's a city of, 250 square miles with a population of 8.2 million residents, right? Something like that. And that those sort of numeric things are more likely to get pulled into an LLM. So in healthcare, don't just say that, this treatment has been shown to be more effective than an X treatment. Say it's been shown to be 54% more effective than Y treatment, something like that.
Yeah. On sort of a related note, I've heard that described as non-consensus data.
Okay.
If you publish non-consensus data, which is sort of the intersection of data and taking a stand, you are more likely to be included and cited, which makes sense to me.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And especially since we're seeing, at least I see in my own, I don't know if Perplexity does the same thing, but ChatGPT sort of likes to present pros and cons of almost every topic. And so, if you're on either the pro side or the con side, you have a better chance of taking a strong position on one of those. You have a better chance of showing up somewhere in that answer.
Yeah. You describe your use of AI as, starting with this fumbling process. And one of the things that I think is interesting and uncomfortable about using AI is that that's how pretty much everybody starts.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that's how you continue for some time. Yeah. And each time a new model is released or you try to do something new using AI, there is this uncomfortably long period of time where you're super amateur before you achieve some unlock. And
exactly. Yeah, which is definitely different from like search, definitely a trained monkey can use Google and get value.
Right. Yeah.
Could have used Google, 12 years ago and gotten value out of it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a very different sort of paradigm where you do have to sort of work with AI and understand, try to figure out what it's good at, what it's not. And that definitely does, just in my experience, just takes time. There's no great guide that I found. Maybe I should write it on like how to use ChatGPT for Looker Studio. That information didn't really exist, nor would I necessarily have searched for it. Right. I don't know. When I go to ChatGPT, I need help. I'm not looking for a guide on how to do something. Right. I'm expecting ChatGPT to be my guide.
Sure.
And so I think that there's just some sort of trial and error that is sort of endemic to Gen AI tools that is a new thing. Think of it as like a very low paid intern. Sort of starting out, and where you have to be just very explicit about exactly how you want things done. Right. And then that intern has worked at your agency for a little longer, and it sort of understands a little bit more about kind of what you're trying to do and all that. And then over time, it actually will get better at sort of responding to what you're looking for. And I think, I personally think I've found that, I don't know if it was like explicit in the model that like it just sort of learned more about my Looker Studio questions, but I found its answers getting better and more explicit with me about like, I really am looking for like the exact whatever SQL query to add here. I'm not looking for like the logic behind why to do this. I just want you to give me the box that I can copy. So
if we're talking about work that can be clearly documented, the process can be documented and it's repeatable, that's work that AI can do and is doing in most instances. I think the conundrum, the puzzle that I think about is that's also work that a junior employee does, an entry-level analyst, a junior strategist, an intern. And you only get deep experts, which is, I think, what will remain valuable and prized in the market through lots of reps as a junior level employee. And so I do wonder what it's going to look like in 5 years when, okay, we didn't need to hire a whole bunch of junior level folks. And they didn't advance to a degree of expertise that now makes them differentiated and valuable in market. Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, I guess I Yes, I think so. I think you're right that it may be harder to get sort of on the job training in a traditional sense
Mhm.
for junior folks, but I actually think ChatGPT is going to reward beginners in any field, any discipline who have significant initiative and desire to learn. I think that they actually can, like the notion of sort of repetition. Like
Sure.
I think that there will be new sort of training sort of paradigms where you're given a real world task.
Yeah.
And you as the agency owner give a junior level employee who's just starting a task and say, go figure out how to do this with ChatGPT. Right?
Sure.
Start them with ChatGPT as the tutor and then kind of level them up once they've reached a certain frustration point or whatever. But I don't know that it's like, I think that there will still be a place for like entry level folks. We're still going to need client interactions and and sort of translation of client goals and priorities. Like that is not something that AI is going to do.
Yeah, absolutely
so
agree.
I still think that there's going to be a place for junior level folks. It's just that they like you may sort of have them figure something out first so that they understand why you've set up your Claude project in a certain way.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's going to be a little bit of a different model than kind of what's existed historically, where people are sort of learning over the shoulder of someone more senior. So
yeah. Interesting. So almost an accelerated apprenticeship.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, more like an apprenticeship, I think. Yeah. I've been a largely a solo practitioner for most of my career. I've sort of always enjoyed just like experimenting with things. Like I'm the guy who's like, just give me what you're trying to do and let me go into a Google sheet and figure out, and I can get you the analysis, right? Like that's like kind of like what I love doing for clients. And so I think that ChatGPT is actually going to like accelerate the people who are starting from that position, which I think can be anybody, right? I think that's the amazing thing. You're absolutely right. Like deep expertise is going to be even more valuable than it has been historically. But I also think that a junior level person can level up faster with Gen AI than they would have been able to previously. So,
yeah, I think that's true. But I think that the people who rise quickly will maybe be a different type of junior level employee who might have risen in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
In the past, specific expertise, deep expertise in a particular domain or discipline was rewarded.
Okay.
I think that in the future, more flexible thinking, the ability to connect dots across multiple disciplines, the ability to think strategically, comfort with the discomfort of not knowing, and sort of excitement at not knowing, excitement at exploration, I think will be characteristics that are rewarded.
I guess I'm surprised that they haven't been rewarded like so far. Again, this is like me not being in the agency world, but to me, like those are the people that I would like, I can teach you how to manage a Google business profile in like 2 hours.
Right.
Like, are you the type of person that wants to know why your client is fourth and they should be, third? So get in the pack. Like, I want people who would like, who are excited and like competitive and that sort of thing to understand why. And I can train them on even without ChatGPT, I can like train them on process like fast enough. So, I don't know.
Yeah. I think those people have been rewarded, but they're not prevalent. They're in rare supply.
Okay.
Right. And they always have been, I think, in any business context, whether an agency or other marketing contexts.
Right.
And now they will be even more highly prized.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just thinking back to like we had a small team at when I was working at Thrive Hive, sort of 2018, 19. That was a set of marketing guides for small businesses. We had it was a really great product where we essentially gave small businesses like 2 hours of consulting and 2 hours of work every month for like $130 a month or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And these were by necessity, like very junior, like just out of college. I don't even know. Most of them didn't even have marketing degrees, but they were just like, I want to be in digital marketing, right? And these are the kind of people I'm thinking, like to a person, they were all just like super eager to like help these businesses, and they wanted to understand how Google worked, and like they were just go-getters, and like maybe we just sort of lucked into like finding a half dozen of these people. But like that's to me like I don't know that ChatGPT is going to affect those folks' job prospects moving forward. And I actually think that they probably can sort of move up faster and scale their knowledge faster than they ever have been able to. So
yeah. It's a very interesting time to be in digital
It
marketing.
really is. Yeah. It's exciting. I think the last time I was this excited was when Google first introduced what was at the time the 10 pack, the sort of radical change to the search results, right? I was just like, wow, this is really big. And Google's probably put a lot of resources into this. Like, let's focus on local search. And so I definitely feel like, I mean, this is arguably many times bigger than that. Even if you're just talking about the impact on local businesses, I think that like this new era that we're in is just like a total change, and it's going to be really exciting to kind of try to stay on top of and help businesses maintain and grow visibility. So
I agree. I agree. Really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah,
Thank
likewise.
you.
This has been great. Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making the time.